This is an age of disruption, of profound revolutionary change.
What we're really asking ministers is to empower the ambassadors.
The only thing that you really push forth is the truth.
You don't see many women represented when it comes to the decisions as to how to handle the pandemic.
Good afternoon and welcome to Politico's Competitive Europe Summit. If there is one area the last few years that was roughly shaken up, that is that of microchips. During the pandemic, there were shortages of laptops, electric cars, because of the shortages of microchips. But there is an even bigger threat looming, because the areas where these microchips are produced are engulfed by tensions. Think about Taiwan, for example. We're going to speak about that and about the plans of Europe to really counter that, because there is a big plan to bring back the production home. And we're going to do that with 4 esteemed guests. Before I introduce them, let me remind you that you can ask questions via the Swapcard app, and you can also tweet, of course, using the hashtag. The 4 guests that will be invited on stage. First, we have Jan-Peter Kleinhans, who's working on technology and geopolitics at the German think tank Stiftung Neue Verantwoord. Welcome. Then we also have Colette Maloney, who leads the microelectronics unit at Commission's DG Connect. Welcome as well. We also have Bruno Pang, who works at the French research organization CEA. And we have finally Ludwig von Reiche, who is managing director for NVIDIA in Germany. Welcome. Welcome all. Chips. The EU had a big plan to really, as I said, bring back that production home. And one of the key phrases that was often used to introduce that plan was a plan of 43 billion, was from lab to fab. It really means that all the stages of the semiconductor value chain had to be covered. Let's maybe start with you, Mrs. Maloney, if I can say Colette, if that's fine. We recently had a deal among EU legislators on that plan. The deal was reached in April. Are you now confident that the final outcome is really that everything is covered from lab to fab with that plan?
Okay, so I think you can never be fully secure or comfortable with the plans you've put in place. But I think we're comfortable that we've done a good job in covering the various parts of the value chain and in tackling the various challenges that have been confronting us and are continuing to confront us in the area of semiconductor technology. In terms of production, I can just very quickly, in terms of production, I can say that what we've tried to do is really to make Europe a more attractive place to invest. So, and I'm talking about producing chips themselves, producing wafers, producing equipment, and that sort of activities foreseen in Pillar 2 of the CHIPS Act. In terms of lab to fab, we've set up an array of activities under Pillar 1 of the CHIPS Act, which is called the Chips for Europe initiative. There we have the idea, first of all, of setting up, of supporting pilot lines in advanced technologies, but also in technologies where we're already strong today. And the idea there is to get to get ideas basically and to get know-how that is in our very strong RTO and RTOs and research technology organizations, research institutes more generally in Europe, to get that out of them and into companies. That's what we're doing with pilot lines. We are also trying to stimulate design design is an area where we are particularly behind in Europe, certainly when you look at fabless design, and for that we have plans to set up a virtual design platform, which is targeted primarily to SMEs and startups and should help lower the costs of licensing those technologies.
Okay. I already hear research, production, but also design. Jan-Peter, let me get to you. You're, of course, as a researcher, you work on the global value chain. You really understand what these value chains or what a semiconductor value chain needs. Is Europe covering all the bases, you think?
I think on paper, yes. And I think it's good that with the EU Chips Act, kind of the policymakers' attention has been focused on the semiconductor industry, maybe for a first time in a long time. I think it's fair to say that for more than two decades, the amount of policy attention that this sector has received hasn't happened before, or at least since a very long time. So I think on paper, and Colette mentioned the open design platform, the competence centers, the pilot lines. I think these are really good initiatives and first ideas. But I'm a little bit worried that if we look at the amount of work that goes into the different initiatives, that currently it boils down to fab announcements. If you think about what really
investments about big plants, product.
Exactly, like the announcements from Infineon, from Intel, from Wolfspeed, from Bosch, from ST Microelectronics and Global Foundries and many others, which is great for Europe as an investment place. But if you think about the policy dimension, it is also, and I don't want to sound condescending here, but it's the easiest for policymakers because you simply need to align your state aid, and you need to make the Europe an attractive investment place. But the other things that you talked about, Colette, this is really the legwork, right? Like building up an open design platform, thinking about the business model behind it, thinking about how to sustainably invest in pilot lines, because we have a lot of pilot lines in Europe, but they are all outdated. Yeah. And in this regard, I'm a little bit worried that I don't see the necessary resources on the administrative side, on the policy side, put behind those efforts. Yeah. So I think there is a need for more government resources in terms of personnel, in terms of policymakers thinking through those challenges to put those ideas to life.
Already a lot of worries, but I saw Colette really nodding, so there is a need for more personnel. Let's maybe get back to later to that. Because of course, if we speak about chips design, we have a company here sitting who's really knowledgeable about chips design. Ludwig, can you say, like, what is your perspective? NVIDIA is a global player. Do you think that the EU Chips Act, the plan currently on the table, is it sufficient to really to cover all those bases?
I think we will soon find out how sufficient it is. We have made quite an effort to study it, and we are participating in some projects that essentially bid for components of that. And we're looking forward to participating in these projects. I think what Jan-Peter just said is a valid point. And I would add another one, and that is the availability of highly skilled communities of engineers primarily, information specialists, who can support that, because it is not just running a fab. That in itself is a major challenge. But we're a customer of fabs. We don't have our own fabs, and we don't plan to have them. We would very much welcome to see more fabs in Europe, because it would broaden our market, if you want, as buyers of fab services and products. But it entails an important an ecosystem from pure research to applied state-of-the-art technologies, and I think more needs to be done there as well. So that involves more players than just a fab and a customer.
Maybe one of them can be a research institute where you also have, of course, a lot of brain power to get into that field. Bruno, if you look at this from the research side, is enough done to really like kickstart this whole ecosystem?
Yeah, I think what is important is that today EU has a plan. I mean, they've been planned for developing semiconductor everywhere in the world. I mean, first of them was with the US and then in China, Taiwan, Korea. Everybody has a plan and EU has a plan. And I think that's a really good thing that we have this EU Chips Act today. Of course, there's a number of issues like talent shortage, but that's not only for Europe, that's for everybody. If you look into the world, who are the PhD and postdoc students in the US, and they come from everywhere. So everybody's competing for the talents. And I believe that in Europe, we have a number of strengths that we should rely on. I mean, we have very good research. I mean, we have, especially in microelectronics, we have research institutes who are really renowned everywhere in the world. We have good students. I've spent some time in a university in California, and I can tell you they were very happy when they see a PhD student coming from Europe, because they know that they are very talented and the level of education is very good. And very often they are very happy to have an Italian or a PhD from Spain or France.
But maybe they're
So
staying them there, or
maybe,
they're coming back to Europe.
it's also a good experience for them.
Yeah.
And at some point they might want to come back or not, of course. Some of them will stay there. But it's good also to have students that can, go around, have many experience, and we can benefit from that. So, of course, we should keep them as much as we can, but I think it's also a good thing if they can have various experience. And as far as research organization is concerned, we already work a lot, closely with university academic research, even if in CEA we are deeply involved in technology development and transferring technology to industry. But we really need to work with academic research and universities, even though, to prepare the students and offer them opportunities to train them and have a diversity of opportunities for them to have a training course in our labs, in startups, in companies. That's what ecosystem is about, to provide opportunities to the student to have a number of possibilities, and they can choose their career depending on the training course they can be on.
I heard already a lot the word ecosystem. It's more than, Jan-Peter said, it's more than just the announcement of fab investments.
Exactly.
Maybe a more general question to all of you. Is there currently too much focus on these announcements of the big production plants? And should Europe actually try to get in that game to really get into that pardon my French, pissing contest of getting the most and having the most production capacity? Is that something where Europe should really go into that game? Colette, maybe is that important?
I think it's important that we attract a certain amount of investment and that we have substantially more than we have today. But I don't think we need to enter into this competition that you mentioned. Because there are other parts of the value chain where we also need to invest resources, and as I said, one of them that is so important for us here in Europe is having the design capacity. There's no point in having all these fabs if we can't fill them with chips, and chips coming also from Europe.
But is it something where the Commission has said, okay, we have this headline figure of 43 billion. We really want to go for the big announcements for Intel, maybe TSMC. While, for example, the UK has taken a different route. They have a very low number of investments, but they have really focused on their strengths, design, etc. Is that maybe a better route to take?
Not necessarily. I think one of the very positive things about production. Having production facilities is indeed the ecosystem that grows around them. Usually you don't have fabs on their own. They're often located very closely to RTOs, to research centres. They have their own research facilities nearby. And they keep a local ecosystem of SMEs busy and employed. So that's crucial, and it is an advantage of production. And if you can have a wide variety of production technologies, all the better for the ecosystem.
Yeah, is that familiar that you need a production site to really have that ecosystem around it to make sure that everyone comes to that place?
Well, where that is physically based is perhaps of a secondary concern almost, but I would perhaps look at Europe a little wider than the 27 here, perhaps. If the UK focuses more on the design side, well, they will need a fab ultimately, or a production level fabrication, and they would appreciate probably a production level fabrication somewhere not halfway around the world. And if we look at the geo-strategy of that, I would say yes, we need that. And now here I'm wearing my hat as an erstwhile political scientist, perhaps, but
you say that that is something where the EU and the UK can find each other to really have that.
Well, I think that's. I don't know whether such dialogue is taking place these days, but certainly I would encourage it, because we're talking about an overall investment here, where even an EU plus some current non-members would benefit from that. I mean, Switzerland has a lot of research in that area, or capacities as well. Let's scope it a little broader, perhaps.
Yeah. If we look at it from the research side, is there indeed, are there connections with, for example, the UK, Switzerland? Do we have to look at it at more than the EU plus maybe?
Yeah, because they're part of them. For example, we've been working a lot with CSEM in Switzerland, because they are also involved in the consortia and the European projects, and we've been working with EPFL too in Switzerland. So, I mean, as you said, there's a lot of talent there, there's a lot of capability, so we need to work together, and we very often find being in a consortia together, and we are very happy with it. I mean, we shouldn't exclude anybody, because they are so close to us. They have similar, realities for research, for developing technology. So whatever is possible within the rules of how they can participate in the project and so on, we deal with that and we work with them.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned Switzerland, but not the UK. Are there discussions with the UK on the chips plants?
On the chips in general.
To coordinate, yeah.
Not yet specifically at this stage. I think one of the first steps would be with the research programs, and I think there are discussions going on to associate the UK with the programs, and which would automatically then give them a ticket to participate.
With the chips programs? With the chips research programs?
That would automatically enable them to participate in the chips programs. Yeah.
Okay.
Could I perhaps add a thought here?
After I'll come back to Jan Peter, but no, go ahead. Really brief.
No, I was going to say, it's not all new sites, new facilities. It is also that energizing existing systems. And I'll give an example in a minute that would really help here. I had a meeting with a German state Ministry of Digital Affairs. There are a few states that have that. And they asked me exactly that question: what should we do at the state level? And one concrete suggestion I had for them is talk to your Ministry of Higher Education and tell them that they need to take less than 2 years' time to appoint a new professor. And that's just something maybe specific to Germany, I don't know, but we need to get faster in adapting to these requirements. It's one thing for the Commission or the Council to have these ideas and to allocate budgets, but for that to become really useful in a complex ecosystem, we need to reach out to other players in that ecosystem as well. Yeah.
Still wanted to hear your thoughts about EU, UK, maybe even the global race. There's a lot of emphasis at the factory investments. The UK hasn't done that. Is that a clever route to take?
I think for UK it certainly is, and I mean, in all fairness, the UK in terms of strategy can do different things than Europe with 27 member states, right? Like, the Dutch semiconductor ecosystem is fundamentally different than the French semiconductor ecosystem, than the Austrian semiconductor ecosystem. But to your point regarding fabs, I do think that there's too much focus on who builds a fab where, because of course we all like more manufacturing, but it comes at a cost. It has its price. We are now talking about 30, 40, 50% of subsidies for those fabs. So I think the value proposition needs to be very clear. The goal needs to be very clear. And I think with some of those fab announcements, at least for me, the value proposition is a little bit fuzzy. And I think when we look at manufacturing of semiconductors, I think two things are important. First, semiconductor manufacturing is highly diversified. So the fab that makes a power semiconductor to charge your electric car or to charge your iPhone is fundamentally different than the fab that builds a high-performance cloud AI accelerator or a radio frequency chip for 5G and 6G. Some of those customers that use those chips are in Europe. But Europe, in terms of customers, is dominated by the automotive industry, by industrial automation, by medical devices. So I think we need to also think about, well, who will buy those chips that are subsidized ultimately in Europe? And I think there, the value proposition for the different fabs that have been announced looks very, very different.
Yeah. What do you mean by that? Is that you say like there should be more fabs than catering to the car industry, or what's?
No, I think, for example, it makes a difference if you subsidize an established foundry that offers its services from the get-go to the entire ecosystem, or if you provide subsidies to an IDM, so an integrated device manufacturer, who first and foremost builds chips that have been designed by this one company for this one company. And with a foundry, with subsidizing contract manufacturing, you have more clearly those spillover benefits that you subsidize manufacturing that benefits the broader ecosystem, especially if we want to build up design capacities in Europe. I think a stronger focus on what business model are we subsidizing? Are we subsidizing an IDM or are we subsidizing a foundry?
Yeah, so not a closed loop, but more an open.
Exactly. It should at least play into the cost-benefit analysis.
We already spoke quite a bit about leveraging Europe's strengths. One of the elements that is maybe putting Europe a bit farther than the rest is really the energy efficiency, the Green Deal, the climate consciousness. That's something where CEA is working on. There is this FD soy technology that is really making chips more energy efficient. Can you make the pitch, because you will probably be one of the beneficiaries of EU money, can you make the pitch why this is really something where Europe can excel?
Yeah, there are 2 points regarding energy and sustainability, because that's also a big question. Because these fabs and these fabrication centers, they have an impact on the environment. I mean, they need water, and it's a growing concern everywhere in the world. If you see the plans of the fabs in Arizona, even in Taiwan, they are worrying about water.
And even in Grenoble, there was some protest.
Even in Grenoble. And that's a real thing that we have to consider, the impact and develop ways of more sustainable electronics. And we've been involved in that for a number of years now. And we believe it's going to be a growing concern for everybody. Apart from that, it's also very important, for example, for the automotive industry, they need very high performance chips for some functions, but they also need a diversity of components in a car. You have almost 1,000 electronic components in a car now. And not all of them are very high performance chip. They need very diversified chips. And one of the key elements for these chips is also the consumption. Energy consumption is very key, because you cannot allow all these systems to have too much consumption in the car. So that's why we believe also the technology that has been developed in Leti for many years now, and that is adopted by some leaders in the world, the FD-SOI technology, is for the same performance you can get 25-30% consumption less for the same performance. And that's very important for a number of industries where the consumption of the electronic systems is important. So you need both. I mean, you need very high performing chips, and you need a chip that can also have the same performance, but for less consumption.
Yeah, and is that a technology of which the research happened in Europe and that is also used in European factories? Because that's often the concern that it maybe is researched here and the development is done here, but then it travels.
Yeah, it's been transferred to ST Microelectronics, Global Foundries. Yeah, it's been manufactured in Europe too.
Yeah. Jan-Peter, your think tank has done some research on chips research, and the fact that sometimes the money is going to a very small amount of research institutes. We have CEA, we have IMEC. Is that really a good way to distribute the money, to say?
Well, I think you have to be very clear what you how the money is used, right? So, like Colette mentioned in the beginning, we have, and also from you, we have world-class research institutes, and for them it's totally fine and also good that they collaborate a lot with non-European companies, because it's about having a strong place in the global ecosystem. If it's about, but the entire idea behind contract research behind RTOs is that the commercialization of that research lies with the customer. So we shouldn't kid ourselves that by strengthening European RTOs that we have more commercialization in Europe. I think we need to do this and other things if we want to have more commercialization of that research in Europe, so going beyond just the RTOs and strengthening the broader European university ecosystem and university research. Again, I'm not saying that we shouldn't invest and subsidize RTOs, but we should be very clear what we do with that. And we strengthen the competitiveness of those RTOs, but from that, there's no magical increase of commercialization in Europe.
Yeah. Colette, is that something, because the EU, the CHIPS research budget, 3.3 billion, is coming out of the EU's own budget. So the EU could say, like, we can put safeguards, limits there, that the research that we're funding, that is really commercialized as well in Europe. Is that currently happening? Limits like that?
No, it's not currently happening, no.
Should that happen?
I wouldn't say it should happen 100%. As Jan-Peter says, it's natural that some of these institutes get some of their money, especially when they're working at the leading edge, from companies and from places outside of Europe, from companies outside of Europe who are working at the leading edge. But we do need to ensure that benefits do flow to European companies as well, and probably more than they have in the past for some of these technologies. That's why I think the pilot lines in themselves will not be sufficient to solve the problems we have. So that's why we've other activities, but also we are having discussions now with the pilot lines, with the RTOs, a broad set of RTOs from across Europe. We're also having bringing those discussions, we're bringing industry to participate in those discussions as well. And that's a question we then put to industry. Does industry see the benefits, in particular the EU companies, see the benefits in having these pilot lines, and how will they need to be tweaked so that they will be relevant for European industry as well as companies beyond Europe.
What's the role of geopolitics in there? Because there is a lot of concern that some of the technology will go to China. There is this economic security package now. For example, if CEA says, like, okay, we want to work with a Chinese partner, is on that specific pilot line, is the EU going to say, like, go ahead, no problem?
At this point in time, I think there is nothing, because the way it works is we follow the rules of the research programs. And at the moment, our research program, we've two that we make use of in the CHIPS Act, Horizon Europe and the Digital Europe program. And those programs in particular, Horizon Europe is wide open, and that's one of the things that characterizes that as a research program. I guess what we would have to do, what we can do though, for both of those programs is we can decide up front before we have calls for proposals to say this call is going to be restricted to entities established in countries X, Y, and Z, or whatever, or it'll, you know, that's the way we.
Yeah, there is a lot of
Just a word.
fingers.
Because CEA is a governmental organization, so it's not like we can do whatever we want. I mean,
Is France and more restricted in the partners that you're picking?
It's it's a governmental organization, so we have to abide by the rules, and we have a constant dialogue with. We depend on 4 ministries in France.
And you work with Chinese partners?
It depends, but we don't really today.
Okay.
So, and there's been a lot of concern in the past years, and we even stopped programs sometimes.
Which ones?
Some programs.
Yeah. On chips?
Yeah. No, it was not on chips.
Okay.
But so we have to abide by the rules, and we have a constant dialogue with our government and with the EU. So I don't see this as being really a risk.
Yeah.
I mean,
I'm asking the questions because in the chips world, there is a lot of concern lately as well about not only the production, but also where is the technology coming from, where is it going. We've seen that with ASML, that it was pressured by the US to block some of its sales to China. Ludwig, how are you looking at that element? Is that covered adequately?
I don't know if it's always covered, but I would suggest to expand the view a little bit, expanding on the question that was just discussed, because let's assume a design takes place between an RTO and its partners. Perhaps even there is a foundry in Europe, and perhaps it should be NVIDIA for that matter. We're a company headquartered and listed in the United States, but we have some of our largest customers in Europe. And so ultimately that technology could be a design that we built together with an RTO in Europe, which actually is taking place already, but ultimately finds its way into a European-built automotive car, or on a European highway ultimately. So, or in a high-performance compute center in Europe, where it will benefit Europe. So my suggestion is, of course, there are other dimensions perhaps with regard to Asian countries and whatever, but let's not focus too much on, let's say, just where it is designed and where it is built, but also who benefits from it ultimately. Yeah,
maybe, taking that question, who benefits from all of it? Let's focus a bit on Germany, because we have quite a lot of German inhabitants here on stage. We've seen some of the fab investments are all, or most of them are landing in Germany. We've seen now Intel has upped its investment in Germany to more than 30 billion. There is maybe a TSMC investment coming. I think in the beginning of the EU Chips Act, there was a bit of a concern that it would be Germany's party and Germany's party only. Is that happening at the moment? Is Germany the only or the main beneficiary of this push to bring back the production home? Jan-Peter?
I find it hard to frame it as main beneficiary, because you basically talk about my taxpayer money in terms of subsidies. And the fab that you mentioned, the 30 billion investment, is 10 billion of those 30 billion are subsidized by the German government. So ultimately it comes down to which government is willing to spend the most and creates at least for fabs, the best investment environment. I think it goes to your previous point that right now, unfortunately, there is a preoccupation with front-end fabs because we don't talk about manufacturing itself. We talk about one process step in semiconductor manufacturing, and rarely do we talk about the following process step, which is back-end manufacturing. So in that sense, yes, if you just put all the fab announcements next to each other, then Germany kind of acquired the most. Do I think that this makes Germany the strongest semiconductor ecosystem in the long term in Europe? Not necessarily, because ultimately time will tell whether companies will continue to invest in those fabs, right? Like there is, not just in Europe, but also in the US, there is the risk that we will see a bunch of one-time investments. And 10, 15 years from now on, let's see how many of those fabs actually received sustainable investments, consistently upgrading the process nodes. And I, for one, have a big question mark there.
Yeah. What's your take on that? Because as NVIDIA in Germany, you're a customer in that market. How does it feel that Germany is raking in some of the investments?
Frankly, as a company, we're rather neutral about that. It's a relatively mature ecosystem here, but our largest, or currently our most important design partner is in Belgium. So, and ultimately, some of these designs may find their way into a German or French or Italian fab. So. We're pretty agnostic as a company.
Can I zoom out a bit? Because what does an ecosystem in a country then needs to get more mature instead of maybe a one-time investment? Is that something that you really can build up into different stages to get to that mature phase?
Well, it certainly includes the faster appointment of professors, for that matter, or the build-up of training facilities. Also, obviously, an attractiveness as a location requires more than that to attract talent from other countries, from other continents, for that matter, which is an important challenge. And so there are some soft factors that we should not lose sight of.
Yeah. Colette, does that surprise you that these soft factors come up that often, like attracting the right talent? And is that something that can be addressed in the CHIPS Act, or should that be up to the member states?
When you mean the right talent, it's to work for the fabs, basically, or you mean?
Sure, but also the design space around it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, first of all, I think, as I said earlier, I do believe the ecosystem is really important because it's not just the designers. I mean, it's all the equipment suppliers, the small companies, etc. In terms of the skills needed. That's something that we are trying to look at European level. We have limited capacity, of course, to intervene too much. To intervene in what we would call education, at least. But under the CHIPS Act, we do want to address in each of the member states to address. Skills development, both in terms, first of all, of getting young students into studying, the engineering sciences, because we see that is not happening sufficiently today. But also we're looking at the reskilling dimension as well. And we're watching what other countries are doing there as well. The US has some nice initiatives, certainly for upskilling for upscaling those people that would work in the fabs themselves. I think to a certain extent what we believe as well that the industry should play a role in this. It shouldn't all be state subsidized.
What can the industry do? Both on the research and production side to really make sure that skills gap is maybe met?
Yeah, I think at some point it's important also to go back to your question. You say, is Germany having winning the race or having, I don't know how you phrase it, but at some point it's also important to see Europe as an ecosystem. I mean, it's very good that Germany has fabs and that foreign investment for companies in Germany. And then you could have packaging units. I believe it's in Italy, right, that Intel wants to have a packaging unit, and you could have design in another place. And in the end, you have to consider probably the big picture, saying that all this is in Europe, and that's good. I mean, at some point, maybe forget about the countries and say you have some manufacturing there, design, packaging, research. And the big challenge is how we make all this work at the European ecosystem. I mean, how can we benefit from the presence of fabs in Germany? How can some other country benefit from the pilot lines? Because at some point, some pilot lines have to be located somewhere. So the big challenge is how we ensure that everybody can benefit from this within Europe.
Yeah, and how do you ensure that? Is there an answer to that? Because you're raising the question here, but I'd like to...
We've been working on that for some years now. I mean, because we already collaborate a lot with a lot of academics and research teams that can have access to some parts of our facilities. EU programs certainly helps because we have this consortium, with many members of the consortium that can come and have some research done with us. Of course, when you have this kind of research facilities, it has to be operated by the one who are driving the facility, but we have a number of mechanisms where we can provide access to what we do. And also back to the design part, when we develop technology, the big challenge is also to have some kind of design kits to make these available so that other teams can benefit from the results of the research by using these design kits and designing their own circuits, benefiting from the technologies that has been developed.
Yeah. Jan-Peter, is there a golden bullet to make sure that every country in Europe benefits from this chip?
Challenging.
If I knew the silver bullet or the golden bullet, I would definitely make a lot of money. I don't. I think we also need to be a little bit humble here. That I think often the impression is that governments now can do everything they want and can do to sort of micromanage this ecosystem. And I think it couldn't be further from the truth, because the reality is, on the promote side, so in terms of industrial policy and research policy, as a government, you can only give incentives. At the end of the day, the market will decide whether there are smart and interesting and viable designs coming out of Europe, right? Like at the end of the day, the European car manufacturers will decide if FD-SOI is a viable solution for their needs. They will decide whether a European-designed AI accelerator is applicable for autonomous driving. Of course, we can kind of provide a healthy ecosystem in terms of research and collaboration and access, but I think we shouldn't fall victim to the illusion that now, just because there's policy attention, naturally the ecosystem will flourish. I think it takes much more than that, and we shouldn't forget that we talk about a value chain that is predominantly, as in 99%, driven by the private sector, by private companies. So in that sense, that's coming back to my first point as a last note. I think it would be so crucial that there are more government resources in the form of personnel, in terms of brain capacity, put behind those ideas such as the open design platform, the pilot lines, also R&D policy and how to maybe modernize our educational system, because this is where governments can provide incentives. But right now I feel that there's simply too little government resources in terms of thinking through those challenges put behind those tasks.
That's a clear message.
One thought I could add to that, perhaps.
And I have a question for you afterwards, but go ahead.
No. I think it sounds like a little thing, perhaps, but a little greater fluidity of in this ecosystem of researchers and professionals between RTOs and companies and universities. This is one of the facets of what made Silicon Valley successful. And
Are you recruiting your neighbor right now? Maybe a question, because a lot of the policy priority at the moment is going into AI, generative AI. The rise of ChatGPT has made everyone aware of the power, but the fact that it also needs a lot of computing power, and the chips industry may be one of the beneficiaries of really that rise of AI. We have seen that NVIDIA is one of the beneficiaries of really AI chips. How is that going to change the prospect or the perspective of the industry and of your company in the first place?
Well, it certainly has changed the way we design products, in that we design them for deployment in a high-performance data center first, whereas in the past, the cloud computing aspect of it was almost an add-on to where we had the technology. Obviously, cloud computing has been around for a while, but bringing that into well-organized and connected data centers makes the entire compute cycle more energy efficient, because that's where a 24/7 use of the technology, optimized use of the technology, can be assured better as in a widely distributed environment. So that's one aspect. You will see that not just from us, but that new technologies are announced for such environments before they find their way perhaps into edge devices and so on. And we are keenly aware of the power needs for that, obviously, and making semiconductors more power efficient from one generation to the next has been one of our main design points for the last 25 years. That said, of course, there's a lot more compute demand coming, and the location of such centers close to the most environmentally environmentally best energy generation is very key.
Yeah, which brings us to your neighbor. What do you think about the impact of AI on the chips demand?
I don't know. We have to see what is happening. Of course, I mean, the number of electronics components in any industry has been increasing over the past years, decades. So the possibility that is offered by AI today is certainly, we could think that it's gonna add to the number of chips or systems that will be integrated everywhere. We'll see what happens. As you said, I mean, in the end, the industry is driving the need. I mean, if it makes sense for the automotive industry to put AI chips everywhere in the car, they will do it. If it's affordable, if it's possible on a consumption energy point of view, data management, we can expect that maybe this AI development will bring more, a need for more chips and more semiconductor, but we'll see. It's a balance of many things in the end.
Okay.
So we get prepared to that. We are certainly looking very carefully about the evolution of the technology, but also we are very careful and very close to what the industry is seeing for the future. Because when you are RTO, you need to be very close to what industry is expecting, what industry is envisioning for the future, because that's how you should, you know.
So also a bit of fluidity there.
Yeah, that's how you direct your research also, to be close to what is expected.
Yeah, maybe as a last question, because we almost have to wrap up, and it's going to be a short question, and you all have to give me a short answer, and the answer has to be a geographical area on this planet Earth. In 10 years' time, where will be the center when it comes to chips?
I think in terms of manufacturing, it will continue to be Asia.
Asia?
I think in terms of design, it will continue to be the US, and everything else is fluid.
Okay. Colette, what is your answer to that? Where will be the the hub, the center of chips world? Europe? The Berlaymont?
Well, I'd love to be able to say yes, but I think I'm with Jan Peter on that. It's the way it is today, and I think in 10 years' time, it's a rapidly evolving technology, but the industry takes time to change.
Yeah. Bruno, what is your reply?
I don't really know.
Not CEA?
But of course I could say that. No. Even today, I mean, there's not one country that can build the whole system by itself.
Okay, that's a good reply.
So it's not centralized today.
That's true.
I don't think it will be fully centralized in one point in 10 years.
Ludwig?
It will be more polycentric than it is today.
Okay.
And I am confident that there will be more capacity in Europe.
Okay, that brings some nuance to the whole idea of bringing back the production home. It will stay polycentric. Thanks for that insights. I want to really thank the speakers. Really interesting insights. To the audience, I want to say we're going to wrap up today. There are still some networking drinks, and for that you can go to the rooftop terrace. Isn't that lovely with this Brussels weather? And to the people online, I want to say tomorrow we're back again for a second day focused on cyber and digital defense. Thank you very much.
This is an age of disruption, of profound revolutionary change.
What we're really asking ministers is to empower the ambassadors.
The only thing that you really push forth is the truth.
You don't see many women represented when it comes to the decisions as to how to handle the pandemic.